The airport terminal was calm, almost peaceful, with a light chill in the air. Ibrahim Traore stood near gate 37, waiting quietly. He wasn't dressed in a suit or surrounded by bodyguards, nor did he carry anything flashy. To most people, he appeared just like any other African traveler, but this man was far from ordinary. He was Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso. He preferred to travel under the radar, humble, private and quiet. No cameras, no grand announcements, just him blending in, staying grounded among the people. His recent trip back from Europe, where he had attended important diplomatic talks about gold sovereignty and Africa's future, had ended, and now all he wanted was to return home. As he walked toward the Air France flight to Ouagadougou, he greeted an airport worker with a friendly "Bonjour, ça va?" The worker smiled back, oblivious to Traore's identity. That was how Traore liked it. No fuss. He boarded the plane, nodded politely to the flight crew, and took his seat in business class, 2A, by the window. No one noticed, no one cared. Or so he thought. A few rows behind, however, whispers were beginning. A senior French businessman, the CEO of a major energy company, was also on his way to Burkina Faso, used to VIP treatment, red carpets, champagne, first-class everything. He wasn't happy when the airline told him business class was full. The CEO wasn't used to hearing no. He stood at the boarding gate, tapping his polished shoes impatiently, surrounded by assistants and airline staff. He demanded a seat upgrade. Tensions began to build. The flight attendants scrambled, whispering among themselves, checking their tablets. But the truth was simple. There were no available seats in business class. The CEO wasn't hearing it, though. That's when they called over a senior flight attendant, Claire, who was tall, white and sharply dressed in her Air France uniform. Her cold, forced smile was the first indication that something wasn't right. Once on board, Claire scanned the cabin as though searching for something or someone. Her eyes paused when she saw the man in seat 2A, Traore, sitting quietly reading something on his phone. No expensive watch, no assistants, nothing indicating his true identity. Just a black man in a hoodie. She leaned toward another attendant and whispered, "Probably a mistake." Then she approached Traore with a forced smile and politely said, "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" Traore looked up, handed her the pass, and returned to his reading. But something about his presence didn't sit well with her. Claire returned shortly, now with a more direct request. "Sir, we may need to move you to accommodate another passenger. Would you mind relocating to economy? We'll compensate you." It was an insult, quiet but sharp. Traore raised an eyebrow and in his calm manner asked, "And why me?" She responded with a smile that barely concealed her discomfort. "No reason, sir. Just a small adjustment for our guest." "A guest more important than me?" he asked. Still, Claire didn't answer. She just smiled and walked away, her pride bruised. The passengers around them started to pay attention, sensing that something was off, but no one spoke up. Traore, however, stayed silent and firm, replying, "No, I'll remain in my seat." The tension began to rise, but the storm was still building. Claire was not used to being defied, especially not by a black man, but she didn't back down. "Sir, I insist. This is for operational reasons," she said, now with a colder tone. Traore didn't flinch. He looked her straight in the eye and asked, "If it's operational, then please explain why I am being asked to move and not anyone else." Claire hesitated. She was not prepared for this calm, steady resistance. By now, a few more business-class passengers were paying attention, but no one spoke. The CEO had still not boarded. He was being held at the gate until a seat issue was resolved. Claire walked briskly to the cockpit, whispered something to the captain, and returned with a decision. She approached another black man. Then another, clearly targeting passengers she believed didn't belong in business class. Traore observed silently. His face showed no emotion, but his mind was sharp. The humiliation didn't anger him. It focused him. A young African man in his late 20s, looking confused, asked, "Why me?" Claire gave no response, simply taking his boarding pass. That's when Traore stood up. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. "You are making decisions based on skin, not on tickets. That is called discrimination." Claire was taken aback, visibly shaken. "Sir, I must ask you to sit down. Please don't cause a scene." Traore stared at her, unflinching. There was a certain weight in his gaze, a quiet strength she could not ignore. Claire walked away, muttering under her breath, "These people always causing trouble." Meanwhile, the CEO finally boarded, and Claire greeted him with extra politeness, offering him champagne and ensuring his comfort. The message was clear. You matter. He does not. As the plane ascended into the sky, Traore remained calm, knowing the world would soon know the truth. Mid-flight, Claire returned to Traore's seat, asking, "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" He replied simply, "Water is fine." The CEO, however, was treated like royalty. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in close, and asked about his projects in Africa. The CEO arrogantly replied, "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us. We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded, unaware that the very man she was disrespecting was seated just a few rows away. A nurse, an African woman returning to Burkina Faso, noticed the exchange and whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." As the flight continued, passengers relaxed, unaware of what was about to happen. Traore stayed awake, watching the clouds. His patience, quiet and unspoken, was about to turn into a moment of reckoning. The plane began its descent into Ouagadougou. The cabin lights flickered on as passengers prepared to land. Claire continued to ignore Traore, smiling at the CEO as they approached the airport. What no one in the cabin could see was the growing convoy of black SUVs, military vehicles, and a presidential escort waiting for the arrival of a very important person. The CEO, thinking the spectacle was for him, smirked confidently. Claire, already preparing to escort him off the plane personally, shared a laugh with him. But just as the plane stopped, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Out the window, passengers could see presidential guards standing at attention, their weapons poised. Burkina Faso's top ministers stood nearby. Claire gasped, "What is this?" The CEO stood up, proudly smoothing his suit, saying, "I told you, I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could step off the plane, a tall officer in a black beret entered the aircraft. His boots echoed down the aisle as he walked toward Traore. The officer raised his hand to his forehead in a sharp salute. "Moura, President, welcome home." The cabin fell silent. Claire's face drained of color. The CEO's jaw dropped. "President?" he stammered. Traore stood calmly, dignified, as the truth settled in. Without a word, Traore nodded at the CEO. Another officer stepped forward. "You two will come with us," he said coldly. The CEO and Claire were detained, led away for questioning, and passengers watched as they disappeared down the stairs, their arrogance stripped away. As Traore walked off the plane, he was greeted by his people, his guards, his ministers, and a cheering crowd. The nation's leader had returned, but this time everyone knew the truth. The CEO and Claire were now facing charges of public insult and discrimination. The French embassy tried to intervene, but Traore made his stance clear. Burkina Faso is a sovereign nation. No one is above the law. Within hours, the story spread across the globe. Videos were leaked, news outlets reported on the incident, and the hashtag Jash is Stand with Burkina Faso trended. African youth celebrated. This moment was a powerful reminder that Africa's dignity would no longer be trampled upon. Back at the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were being held accountable. They had underestimated the power of a man who valued dignity and justice. As Traore returned to his work in the presidential palace, his quiet humility had made a lasting impact, reminding the world that true power does not need to shout. It simply stands firm.